We conclude our magical series on the new book, Xanathar's Guide to Everything, by looking at the brand new spells.
Greetings, spellcasters. I'm McLaughlin.
And I'm Monty Martin.
And we are
the Dungeon Dudes.
On today's episode, we are taking a look at the third chapter in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, which has to do with a bunch of new spells.
Yeah, spells are super awesome because there's something that both dungeon masters and players can use quite equally, whether you're inflicting them upon your players or using them to protect yourselves against the dungeon master's latest scheme.
Yeah.
And Xanathar's Guide to Everything has almost 100, I think, new spells with a few new things for basically every spellcasting class in the game.
Yeah, and they're all really cool. There's some that really stood out to us, and we're going to be discussing those ones today.
Well, the first thing I think to talk about actually is that some of the spells in Xanathar's Guide to Everything are not completely new. We have seen some of these before in Unearthed Arcana, and a few of them are also reprinted from the Elemental Evil Player's Guide. However, because Elemental Evil and Princes of the Apocalypse is an adventure module, they're reprinted here so players can get them in hard copy without having to get an adventure that they might play and spoil it for them.
Also reduces the amount of books you need at your table if you were trying to do that.
Exactly. It's an all-in-one source. So Kelly and I have looked through the spells chapter. We've had a glance at all of them, a thorough read of others, and we've kind of picked out some of our favorites that we're going to talk about because, again, we can't spend all of our time talking about every single spell in this book. There's just too many of them. So Kelly, why don't you start us off with one of your favorites?
The first one that I want to talk about is Infernal Calling.
Yes, the quintessential devil summoning spell.
My favorite feature about this spell is not necessarily that it's an amazing spell, but it's more amusing to me, the way that it works. You summon a devil who is controlled by the DM and may or may not cooperate with you depending on the commands you give it. It basically says you can try to give it commands. You can use intimidation or persuasion or deception to try to talk the devil into doing what you want. The devil's more likely to listen if it's evil commands.
Yeah.
But it's really up to the DM.
But there's a really interesting out in that if you have a talisman that bears the devil's true name, it must obey you, and you can actually summon an even more powerful devil. And I like this because DMs, this means that you can actually give, first of all, your villains an out, but imagine your villain summons a devil, has it fight your players, but then your players defeat that villain and take the devil's talisman that they can now use to summon the same devil that was once their foe.
Ends up being a really cool option for a magic item.
Exactly. Now, this isn't the only new summoning spell in this book. There's actually demon summoning spells, too. They work a little bit differently because demons aren't interested in making a deal. They just want to kill indiscriminately. So your demon summoning you can actually use in combat, but you actually need the blood of a humanoid killed in the last 24 hours to do it. And it's still risky that the demons might turn on you, too.
Luckily, there's a lot of fresh blood in most D&D campaigns.
That's very true. For those of you that want something to do with that fresh blood afterwards, Danse Macabre is a spell that allows you to actually summon undead, bring them and go rise like your quintessential necromancer in combat, which is different from the other creation undead spells that are in the player's handbook, which you need to spend several minutes or hours casting.
I think that is the spell that every person who wanted to play a necromancer was waiting for. Because every time I see the Raise the Dead spell, I'm like, oh, I have to do that before combat. But I want to be the necromancer who in combat is just
who brings them up.
Get up here, zombies.
I gotta say, I think that if you want to play like an evil or dark side sort of spellcaster or warlock, you really made out like a bandit with this regard because there's a lot of evil summoning magic in this book. And a lot of really good necromancy, damage dealing, and life stealing spells. But that's not all. To top it off, there's an amazing spell called Soul Cage, which lets you actually capture a soul to interrogate or use to heal yourself. It's a really fantastic spell.
You keep it in a little cage, and you get to usher commands to it and use it for the various things listed in the spell. Another one of my favorite parts of this is not only does it give you a lot more summoning options for necromancers or evil or spellcasters, but also something that was missing, I found, was spells that required an intelligence save. And there's a whole bunch of them in here.
And they are super nasty as well. Now, you don't need to be evil to use these spells. Yeah. I think it's great if you want to play more of a trickster mindbender, but you wanted one with a little bit more punch than what the player's handbook options gave you. There's some really fantastic spells for this in Xanathar's Guide. Yeah, I think the first one to talk about is Synaptic Static, which we're calling the Psychic Fireball.
Basically.
Because even though it's a 5th level spell, it does as much damage as Fireball, but hits intelligence, does psychic damage, and includes a nasty debuff to the people's attack rolls that are hit by it. Yeah. It's an amazing spell, probably like just the perfect blend of like hurting people, debuffing them, all in one really awesome package.
Yeah, it feels really good to cast that spell. We actually had it cast in my game last night, and it was great.
Yeah.
What are some of the other intelligence spending spells?
Well, for your 9th level spell, you have Psychic Scream, which does a boatload of psychic damage, stuns everybody, but what's the icing on the cake?
When they die from that spell, their head explodes.
So if you want to get some scanners action happening in your campaign, you got it right here in Psychic Scream.
An important spell that I do want to talk about.
Which
Invulnerability.
One? Oh yes. Well, we're on the topic of 9th level spells. Invulnerability is bonkers.
Basically, you cast it, and you are immune to all damage for, 10?
As long as you're concentrating on the spell.
Yeah.
Now, what this means, because you're immune to all damage, your concentration can't be broken by damage either, because you don't take it.
I think it's important to note, if you're giving a spellcaster this spell, be aware of maybe what ways you can use it fairly and what ways you can't.
Now, of course, you can break invulnerability in other ways. There's a few other spells that do force casters to make concentration checks, and you can always use Dispel Magic.
True.
But a really cool idea for this spell is actually using it on a villain, because I think a big problem that villains have in D&D is that they don't get to deliver their villainous monologue before they get smacked down by the player characters.
But if they have invulnerability, you can even present them earlier in the campaign as a powerful figure standing before your party saying, "You can't touch me, I'm so powerful." And then, when they meet them later on, they're going to know what kind of person they're dealing with.
It's a super intimidating spell because your players know they can't hurt this guy at all, but they know why they can't, and they're going to have to figure out a way around it when they actually do have to fight this amazing villain. There's a few other really good picks that stand out for druids as well. I think they've got some great high-level spells that bolster their wild shape. Yeah. We would be remiss if we didn't mention the amazing spell Healing Spirit, which pretty much, I think it's going to be the most controversial spell in Xanathar's Guide to Everything because of the amount of healing it can do out of combat for only a 2nd level spell.
Yeah. There is also one that lets you bring an entire forest to life, pretty much. And
yes, there is. That's Animate Forest. It's not called Animate Forest. It's called Wrath of Nature. Yeah. But it basically is Animate Forest, and the whole forest starts attacking, throwing rocks at people, and trying to suck them down into the undergrowth.
So no matter what spellcasting class you choose, there are a bunch of spells in Xanathar's Guide to Everything that we think really change the game and feel really good to cast.
Yeah, and I think that these are things that you can start integrating in your campaign next week. You can start having an awesome new villainous spellcaster that comes in with Invulnerability, Soul Cages, Synaptic Static, and Mental Prison. Or you can start offering your druid player characters the ability to make a grove to protect themselves, and lots of great options for tricking your wizards into making deals with devils.
Yeah.
I love this book. I think the spells in Xanathar's Guide to Everything are so awesome, and I cannot wait to force you guys to start making some intelligence saving throws.
Which is great, because our entire party has terrible intelligence, so I can't wait to die by having my head explode.
Yeah. Well, on the flip side, you're going to get to make some really awesome new characters with the new character building options.
That's true, and you can make my tools finally matter with the DM Toolkit.
Yeah. I absolutely love this book. It's totally worth checking out. And I think that it's probably my number one D&D book for 5th edition.
It's
now.
my number one D&D book of all time. It's beautiful inside and out. What more could you want? So yeah, from the artwork to all the content inside, the spells, the player options, the DM toolkit, every section of this book is jam-packed with important, valuable, amazing information.
It's super inspiring, and we're just chomping at the bit to use these in our games. And you will too once you've had a read through it. We've read it like cover to cover 3 times. It's a really brisk read, so enjoy it, get inspired by it, and pick up a copy. You can follow the links down below for that. Now, if you're looking for a quick reference for all of the spells that you find in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, Gale Force 9 is actually coming out with a set of spellbook cards, part of their whole series that you can use for your characters at the table. They're an excellent reference, and we have a full review of these cards, which you can watch right up over here.
Or if you need help creating your first character, we do have a video series on that over here.
You can pick up a copy of Xanathar's Guide by following the links right down below.
Subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.